Things have been happening around the Bloodline. Roman Reigns is uniting the family together as the chief of the tribe again. Solo Sikoa does not relinquish this new position he has claimed by force. Amidst all this, we have Jey Uso and Jimmy Uso, but also The Rock, the final boss, whose shadow looms over this grand storyline that has actually been ongoing for years. What is my perspective on this entire situation? What are the major pitfalls to avoid, in my opinion? What expectations can we have regarding this story, which has provided us with many moments worthy of cinema?
Will acknowledge.
Are you having coffee soon? We're going to catch up together, and it's going to get intense.
You are on the Wrestling Paradise. My opinion about the dangers around the Bloodline. Here we go.
He's here! He's here! He's here!
I don't want there to be the slightest misunderstanding about what I think of the Bloodline. I mentioned how much I love certain stories, certain matches, which were sometimes worthy of a movie. Moments that were amazing. There is a collection of iconic scenes since the beginning of this story, which has been ongoing since 2020. I also expressed my frustrations, at times, the things I wasn't a fan of. And that's why today, I think it's the right time to take a step back and reflect on the Bloodline, where they stand in the present. I would say, what we can hope for, what we can expect for the future, especially the pitfalls to avoid, into which they seem to be starting to step a little. I will obviously elaborate on all of this. But first, what exactly are we talking about? We all remember Roman Reigns, leader of the tribe since the summer of 2020, absolute domination for several years, a historic reign, to say the least, that lasted almost 4 years, which is quite astonishing. When you take a step back, this hadn't happened in a very, very long time. Along the way, he somehow brought his entire family together to form a bloodline, a family. A dominant Anoa'i dynasty with almost all possible titles, WWE, with Jey Uso, Jimmy Uso, and Solo Sikoa along the way, along with the entire story surrounding Sami Zayn during a period. Basically, there have been several chapters in this long story with, as mentioned earlier, clearly the shadow of The Rock looming over all of this. Since, in reality, by the way, The Rock himself said it, in fact, from the moment Roman Reigns declared himself, and not just declared, but also conquered the title of Chief of the Tribe, it was written that he would have to defend this title against the other big name in the family, obviously, The Rock. Sooner or later, it was bound to happen. What does all this mean? It means that it's a long story, but it experienced a new revolution, I would say, in 2024, when Roman Reigns lost his title and also lost by abstaining and allowing Solo Sikoa to take his place, his status as the chief of the tribe. This is quite significant, representing a revolution compared to recent years. It seems we are heading towards a battle in the fall of 2024 between Roman Reigns and Solo Sikoa to either reclaim or maintain the title of Chief of the Tribe for the famous Ulafala, the renowned red necklace, which symbolizes this prestigious title of Chief of the Tribe. This title has gained even more meaning and significance over time, unfortunately also due to certain deaths in the family, as well as, let's say, in terms of awareness, I want to say, of the richness of this family. It's true that the bloodline is not just the names I've mentioned. It also includes the past, Umaga, Yokozuna, obviously, The Rock who is still around, Rikishi, and even some others who are a bit less known. So, all of this is to say that it is clearly one of the biggest stories in current wrestling. So, that's basically the quick history we can provide. And the question that we can ask in all of this is what all of this will lead to. What we might feel coming in the fall of 2024. So, obviously, as I said, we can feel the Roman Reigns versus The Rock for the title of Tribal Chief coming at the end of this story. And the big question is this, tell me what you think, by the way. Is this the end of this long story? Is the real conclusion Roman Reigns against The Rock to determine who is truly at the head of the table? The real question, perhaps the big question, and the great resolution of this long story that has been unfolding for several years could really be this. Then, the question we can ask ourselves behind this, which leads to a first caveat in all of this, is who is really going to come out of this story stronger? And above all, Does this lead to real new stars? In the long term, beyond Roman Reigns and The Rock, who has truly benefited from this long story, fundamentally, and this is my first concern, and especially my first negative observation regarding the Bloodline in the fall of 2024, is that I realize that, indeed, all of this is a backdrop leading to the iconic match. The match that is all scripted, increasingly so over time. I want to say, let's not forget that for years, The Rock was no longer, not at all in WWE, and that this whole situation was still just a fantasy that is becoming more and more real. There you go. It's still important to be fully aware of that, but above all, what worries me is that Solo Sikoa, for example, in 2024, had to take over, in a way, this story for a few months, proclaiming himself the new chief of the tribe and seizing power within his family. By also bringing in new names, the Tongs, as I like to call them, and of course, Jacob Fatu. And thus also adopting a sort of new character for Solo Sikoa. I still have reservations about him. I find that even more so in the fall of 2024. Over time and through the segments, we increasingly realize that he still lacks credibility and legitimacy to say certain things, like acknowledge me to Roman, for example. What is Solo Sikoa's track record? Aside from the fact that yes, he has taken down some superstars in Roman's absence, but has he won the major title? No, he didn't win. He couldn't beat Cody Rhodes, but in reality, it was because of Roman Reigns in the storyline, that's for sure. But what is his record to really claim to be above Roman Reigns, aside from the fact that he believes his bloodline is more intimidating and dominant? This is where I find the big disconnect between what Solo Sikoa and his bloodline claim in the storyline and the reality. I find that his faction is not nearly as terrifying as it should be. Can you only imagine how much better it would be if Solo Sikoa were much quieter already? Still with his own style, of course, but with onologme, etc. It's clearly not as scary and intimidating as if he were much quieter. The same goes for Jacob Fatu, who does too much but isn't presented as a truly indestructible threat. He is too humanized. This Jacob Fatu, unfortunately, I wish he were a wild beast. Nothing more, nothing less. The flip-flops I find are sometimes close to ridiculous. And of course, I see this, I have a hard time really seeing them as a legitimate threat to Roman Reigns, who will inevitably end up, as we imagine, reclaiming his throne, accompanied by the Usos. And that's something I also criticize about the Bloodline. If we take a moment to assess them, everything seems quite predictable. And finally, isn't this a new way of telling WWE stories in 2024, and even for the future? In any case, at the moment when this Bloodline received its biggest spotlight, I often felt that certain things were predictable from miles away. For instance, we remember the famous tribal combat at SummerSlam 2023 between Roman Reigns and Jey Uso, where there was a heel turn from Jimmy Uso on Jey that came out of nowhere. This is another criticism I have regarding the Bloodline and how this situation progresses. Sometimes it feels like the idea is to create shocks and plot twists just for the sake of doing it, just to surprise and shock and generate buzz, but sometimes at the expense of meaning and substance as well. Because look, where has all of this ultimately led? Jimmy Uso, sure, he has already done promos, etc. But deep down I find that his heel turn still lacked meaning. It really came out of nowhere. On one hand, yes, it was shocking, that's for sure. But in any case, I find that there is a bit too much of this game in the Bloodline of I betray you. Actually, no, I'm with you, and what if I betray you? And it's a bit too much, basically. The idea of wanting to constantly create swerves, as they are called, shocks. You get the idea. And I find that this is a trap that WWE falls into a bit too much with the Bloodline. But the fact is that we can still recognize, even in the fall of 2024, that it has clearly become a show within the show. I like to call it that way, the Bloodline. Because it's true that sometimes you feel like you have Raw, you have SmackDown, you have NXT, and you have the Bloodline. who really follows his own story, who is truly in his own little world, I want to say, in WWE, with his characters, with his stories, with his quests. And it's almost as if they have their own separate world. What is great, and indeed a significant strength, is having such a strong story for so long that you can very well be content just watching the Bloodline. And what happens around the Bloodline every week is entertaining, at least having things to chew on and just following that. It's possible. But all of this still raises questions for me. I wonder, what does all of this lead to? That's what raises questions for me today. Because we notice it, I mentioned it on the channel, that I appreciate the new situation surrounding Roman Reigns is one of reconquest, seeking revenge, reclaiming a throne, regaining a championship, and restoring his status, all while facing significant obstacles along the way. So, the obstacles, at least in the fall of 2024, seem to initially be Solo Sikoa and Cody Rhodes, but is the real major obstacle ultimately The Rock, the final boss? Very well possible. We will see what the future holds for us, and there you go. I must say that I appreciate this situation surrounding Roman Reigns, who is in a kind of great redemption. We can say, I appreciate it. It's interesting. It refreshes his character, which had become perhaps a bit too repetitive over the years. And it's true that even we could feel that he was almost he was trapped in his character. At least it felt like a loop that kept repeating, except for a few exceptions. After all, there was still some very, very good stuff. I am obviously thinking about the Bloodline Civil War at Money in the Bank 2023, which was truly monumental and one of the highlights of WWE in recent years, in my opinion. Roman Reigns, in any case, I think, yes, I enjoy following his quest, but the exclamation point I put behind all this, and a big trap, is that I find he is currently heading too much, at least in the fall of 2024, towards a smoother character. Whereas on the contrary, I think he should have kept that side as it has always been since 2020, that intense, serious, tribal chief side. So yes, he has still retained some characteristics, fortunately. But I fear that WWE, and thus the entire creative team, will think that now, with Roman Reigns, we are going all in on the face turn. He is, well, one of the major baby faces in current WWE, and we think, well, this shouldn't be a problem. Also, thanks to his absence for a while and the hatred for Solo Sikoa, it won't be a problem for him to be a babyface, and the fans will love him. Unlike a few years ago, when Roman Reigns' run as a face never worked. In any case, it has often been a fiasco, not always. We should still remember that at certain times, even while being a babyface, Roman Reigns has been popular, with some fans at times. I think, for example, of the children and the women. In any case, we often saw fans of him in the audience, so it's not like there was unanimous hatred against him for years. Far from it, it was mainly a portion of the fans, I would say. And in reality, it wasn't really against him. It was much more against the way WWE pushed him too much and created something that felt too artificial and manufactured. They should have done things the way they did starting in 2020 with him, and it would have worked much better, I want to say. In any case, briefly, it seems we are heading towards a period where Roman Reigns will be a babyface, and I am somewhat worried if he will be a classic WWE babyface. But Roman is not the only one in this story. What could we also be heading towards? One imagines that sooner or later, The Rock will be involved again in the whole story surrounding the Bloodline, which can lead to very good things. Of course, I am personally looking forward to that with great excitement. Tell me if you are also looking forward to his return, and especially to seeing him involved on screen in WWE, remembering what happened on the road to WrestleMania 40. In any case, personally, I am very much looking forward to it. And it's certain that we can imagine there could be Cody against The Rock, Cody Rhodes, The Rock, Roman Reigns, The Rock in the long term, or even sooner. It's very possible. Multi-person matches, for example, the bloodline of Solo Sikoa against the bloodline of Roman Reigns. One can imagine that the Usos would join him and that he would have exceptional allies, including possibly Cody Rhodes. There are possibilities, but I think that in this case, well, The two biggest mistakes of WWE in this situation are, number one, Solo. Sikoa and the new Bloodline are not at the level for me. I find that they are not scary at all. I think they are not intimidating enough. And sometimes I feel like they overdo it to maybe create a certain image, but it doesn't work. Also, I think that WWE doesn't make them strong enough in the booking. It's far too much, with victories that are often questionable, often contentious, and not fully dominant. And that's limited. After a while, how can you really be afraid of a wrestler? At least in the storyline, if he always wins by cheating, it's complicated. So for me, that's the big problem. Maybe the number one issue with the Bloodline right now. And number two, I wonder what will be left in the long term. Apart from having then, often in WWE, we hear the word payoff. What is the payoff? One could say it is the culmination, the resolution to where all of this leads. What is the reward at the end of it all? I tell myself aside from that, and well, I am still the happiest. Aside from Roman Reigns against The Rock and having what some might consider the biggest main event in WrestleMania history or the ultimate matchup of all these recent years. Aside from that, what a payoff I want to say. Can we consider today that Solo Sikoa might eventually take up the torch? Or is it on the contrary in wanting to seize power in 2024 in the story, obviously? And by not having, let's say, the right writing around him from WWE on this path, is Solo Sikoa not doomed, which is not good for the future, to really have a significant spotlight on his own the day Roman Reigns, for example, is no longer around at all? What will become of him at the end of this whole story? Since he really seems destined to be collateral damage in Roman Reigns' quest for the top, you think that when Solo Sikoa gets taken down by Roman Reigns once and for all, it might not actually happen right away. Perhaps we would learn along the way that Solo Sikoa was just an enforcer for The Rock, which is very possible. Let's not forget that at Bad Blood, a fan filmed him, and he had said that all of this at the moment when The Rock appeared was part of the plan. So we can imagine that a Solo Sikoa is actually just a henchman and a disguised tribal chief for The Rock, who essentially wanted to take power through them and take it from Roman Reigns and his allies. One can imagine that, and perhaps in this specific scenario, at the moment, it would be definitively revealed that the true great enemy of Roman Reigns is indeed The Rock. Could Solo Sikoa, after a while, still manage to start over in a certain way and become one of the big stars of WWE, carrying the future of the Bloodline on his shoulders? Or could a Jacob Fatu assert himself along the way, but certain mistakes have already been made that make him much less intimidating? Or on the contrary, does a Zilla Fatu, the son of Umaga, represent the future of the Bloodline and this entire story? Maybe. Or is it that, in reality, on the day there is the payoff Roman against The Rock, maybe they will even do 2 matches? Personally, I think, frankly, so tell me if you disagree, there's no problem, we can talk about it. But personally, I think we have waited so long for this match. There has been such a build-up for years for this. Why not have several? It's true then. It could be, for example, 1 WrestleMania and then a SummerSlam. It could be 2 WrestleManias in a row. Afterwards, I also think that the Bloodline does not need titles on the line. And that's also another concern I can add to my commentary about the Bloodline. It's that I think to myself, it's already such a strong story. There is already so much of this idea of being the chief of the tribe, having the Ulafala, being the true head of the table. So, ultimately, what would it bring apart from symbolizing that you're at the top of WWE, the WWE title, for example, to this situation? It wouldn't bring anything really new. For example, for me, a Roman Reigns versus The Rock for the title of Tribal Chief is already quite sufficient. They don't necessarily need the title. And so, my fear is that this situation surrounding the Bloodline will take over the championship, at least one of the main titles. Even though she doesn't need it, Lulafala and the prestige of being the chief of the tribe are already quite sufficient. And I fear that WWE could end up alienating some of the fans by incorporating the title into this story for 2025, for example. And also that Solo Sikoa and others completely come out. To bury and discredit this entire great story in favor of a massive and monumental Roman Reigns versus The Rock. This is certainly good, but in the long run, who will it have benefited? So obviously, you think there will be a winner between Roman Reigns and The Rock. There is indeed one who will remain and continue to carry the torch afterwards. We don't know. In any case, you will have understood. I have a lot of questions about the Bloodline. I have doubts, I have concerns. As a fan of this situation from the very beginning, I think to myself, I wouldn't want all of this to be wasted or not live up to its enormous potential. And above all, I would like that beyond the predictable, but that's okay. On the contrary, we take the time to build it. Roman against Rocky. Beyond that, I would still like some to benefit more, and I fear we are not heading in that direction. Because Jey Uso, for example, Jey Uso, he has certainly had a solo spotlight. We can say that thanks to the Bloodline, he has been able to become a superstar on his own. But later, the future will tell us if, without the Bloodline around him at all, he will remain one of the biggest names in WWE. In any case, one of the most important names. It's worth seeing. This is a real challenge for Jey Uso in the coming years. Essentially, when there is nothing left around the Bloodline and this story is definitively buried, will he still be relevant? Will he remain on the island of relevance? Or will he drift into the ocean of mediocrity? That's the real question. The same goes for Solo Sikoa. What will become of him when the Bloodline is over? Or will this story surrounding the Bloodline never come to an end? Is it like a TV series that never stops and continues for years, with the title of Chief of the Tribe at stake each time, a threat, someone who wants to see it, and someone who has to defend it? Can you only imagine in the long term, I don't know, a Solo Sikoa or a Zila Fatu or a Jacob Fatu who is the chief of the tribe and must defend it against others, with new betrayals within the clan and new alliances? Well, I hope in any case you guessed it by listening to these words. I hope it doesn't become mega repetitive over the months and years. In any case, let me know in the comments if you think that WWE is perfectly dodging all the pitfalls surrounding the Bloodline, or if you find it has been heavy and boring for a long time. What are you looking forward to, or on the contrary, are you fed up with the Bloodline? It's possible. It's true that, as I said, apart from plot twists, alliances, and betrayals of all kinds, we have already seen many, including some very significant ones. Whatever happens, it's almost as if anything would feel like déjà vu in the Bloodline. And that's why I would totally understand your opinion. In any case, let me know in the comments what you think. By the way, I want to say a big thank you to everyone who comments, who keeps the channel alive, who likes, who subscribes, etc. Thank you very much for all of that. I am very grateful for that. It helps me a lot. And then, above all, it's cool to know your opinion and to share all of this as a wrestling fan. Passion is often expressed through sharing, especially in wrestling. So don't hesitate to share your opinion. And I will conclude by saying that I hope WWE will avoid certain pitfalls that could really ruin this storyline, which has been one of the best in wrestling in recent years.
We can say that this topic raises a lot of questions. I hope you had a good time watching this video, and I invite you to stay in the paradise of wrestling to look at some other ones. See you right away.